Welcome to another episode of the prestigious, world-renowned Mad Truth podcast. Here we are, people.
Coming right at you straight out of the future because we're talking by telephone.
Yeah. We're living in the future age.
I'm calling from a phone box.
Straight out of Blade Runner, man.
Straight out of, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, fingers crossed. We're not dealing with any technical issues, but I think for the sake of posterity, whoever she is, we're currently doing this mid-lockdown, so we're not allowed to go and actually do anything in person. So that's an exciting challenge for musicians everywhere. Am I right? Huh, guys?
Yes, I'm really enjoying it, because, you sort of... For me, music is a very solitary, isolating experience because I'm not actually talented enough to play with anybody else. I'm just going to close my fucking window because somebody's decided to build a fence at fucking 9 o'clock at night. Right, listen, speaking of music, my neighbour has decided to take up the oboe, right? Or some kind of...
Well, there are worse things to take up.
Yeah, right. So he's decided to take up the oboe, and literally every single day, multiple hours a day, all you hear is like...
You're not an oboe fan, then?
I'm not. I would be if he was competent at the oboe.
Everyone's got to start somewhere.
Yeah, well, not if I have to hear it.
Anyway, it's funny you talk about music being a solitary experience. I've certainly found there's a weird modality to the way I whenever I do any kind of music stuff, because I've always thought of it as a very solitary thing, just sitting around practicing or writing or producing on my own, and playing with other people completely took me by surprise. I never really saw it coming until it was too late.
So what did you get out of that? So you went from being social no friends. Well,
quite literally. Yeah, I really, I never really knew how to kind of, when I kind of first moved to Nottingham, I didn't really know how to kind of go out there and meet people. So I kind of eventually I kind of gave up trying, and I joined about 3 or 4 bands at once. And as a drummer, that's pretty normal. Drummers always seem to be quite.
For me, that's a headache.
Well, and so I kind of, I just joined a ton of bands at the same time, and it kind of and suddenly I found myself, I don't want to say in high demand or anything like that, because that's not how it is, but, suddenly, that's
high demand. You put yourself down, but you're working with...
I am now, but this is about 5 years ago. Suddenly, after you're obliged to rehearse, 3 nights a week with different groups of people, eventually something sticks. But the whole, and of course, that whole kind of, being sociable and hanging around with other people for rehearsals now, totally screwed because we're locked down in our houses.
How's that going for you?
Well, because I'm a music teacher, it means that all of my business has gone away, which is very exciting. And I think I fall between the cracks on all the...
That's one level of catastrophe. What about your housemates? What about the people that you're living with? Are you starting to go a little bit mad?
We're actually not, because as it happens, we're a house full of musicians, so it just means we've just been doing music stuff the whole time. But we did buy a PlayStation 2. That was exciting. We're trying to source a functional copy of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, but in the meantime, yeah, well, absolutely. But in the meantime, anyway, I've been, I think it's. I can certainly speak for all the musicians I know, in that now that we're locked down with our instruments and there's nothing else we can do except practice, nobody I know is getting the practice in.
Well, yeah.
I kind of keep telling myself, I've got all this time to kind of I can finally get all my kind of... I'm currently supposed to be releasing the Radio Eroticism Earth Drowning album pretty soon. I've done nothing on that. I've done nothing on anything else. Suddenly it's like, it's a nice little enforced break for me, to be honest.
Well, can I tell you something about that, right? So as soon as you get the opportunity to do something really productive and sort of sit down in the situation we're in right now and sort of you have the opportunity to work on things. Like I was going to write another movie called Dolly Death Proof, and I basically wrote up all the sort of the plans for it and stuff a few weeks ago. And yeah, I was meant to sit down and write it, but I haven't done feck all.
Nice.
No. I mean, for a long time now, I've been trying to better myself as a human being and an individual, and I've been trying to sort of make myself into a better man and a better person, and kinder and sort of more creative and sort of put myself out there more. But everything that I was doing, everything that I stopped doing in terms of bad habits, I've just fallen right back into that state of mind. So all it takes is, and it says something about my character, doesn't it? All it takes is a little pandemic, and everything that I've worked towards just goes out the window.
It's a tough situation to be in. I think, we're all kind of cursed with all this free time now. Suddenly we've got to put our money where our mouth is as far as getting the projects done that we said we would.
What money? No one's working.
What?
What money? No one's working.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I don't know. I'm hoping to get a little bit more. Now that we're kind of properly bunkered down, I'm hoping that we're going to suddenly start restart working and get some more stuff done as far as music stuff. Like I said, I've got the Radio Eroticism album. I'm currently hopefully going to be releasing in the next couple of weeks.
Tell me about that. So, for people that didn't listen to our previous podcast, which you should do because they're amazing and they're really insightful and really interesting. So, Radio Eroticism was.
So that was it was a kind of a drone improv project I kind of started. I think last time we spoke about kind of flicking paint at canvases and that kind of thing for catharsis.
Which is always like Radio 1 fodder. Like they would just eat that up.
But it's not really stuff for listening. It's just supposed to be kind of making weird noises and hashing it out, and by the end of the time the improv session you feel a bit better. But
can I just ask what kind of weird noises we're talking about? Are we talking about a whistle? Or a squidge,
the idea was you set a big reverb and a delay, as we all have at some point. Start mucking around and see what comes out, and try and do something to try and kind of get as close toward narrative progress as you can, just using kind of drone sounds and that kind of thing. And it's mixed success.
Are you trying to construct a story out of all these improvised things?
Well, ideally that's the point of the improv in and of itself, but I've kind of been we kind of straying from the path a little bit. I wanted to get more people involved with Radio Eroticism, so the Earth Drowning record was actually from a series of improvisations with my younger sister, who's a violin player.
Great.
And so then then we kind of found, well, actually, being that it's improvisations taken from the same session, you got to work quite hard to make the individual recordings sound as unique as possible, because otherwise it's easy to just hear it all as several different takes of the same thing. So the process that I've been kind of working through, I played I played the old new Doom, the 2016 Doom recently, and I quite and I quite liked Mick Gordon's approach on that, creating the music, where it wasn't so much the musical ideas, they were kind of arbitrary. Well, not that they were arbitrary for Mick Gordon, but as far as a working process, he instead kind of built his kind of whole compositional approach around the systems from which he had derived the music. And that's kind of what I've been looking at with this Radio Eroticism album. Is I've been trying to we've already kind of made some music and it sounds fine, but rather than kind of just make sure that the guitar sounds good and the violin sounds good and, we kind of leave it there, I'm trying to look at system, kind of fairly kind of layered systems. So, suddenly the instruments are doing unpredictable things with feedback and distortion and all this stuff. So it's turning into a completely different piece of music that I've never heard before, all on its own, rather than me having to do any actual compositional work, which makes life a little bit easier.
Sure, yeah.
I tried to layer up something for not the title track. probably the focus track on it, Devil's Bridge over McClinleth.
Whoa, Devil's Bridge over what?
Devil's Bridge over McClinleth. The title was suggested by my sister Hannah. It's a bridge in the middle of Wales, and I went really hard down the narrative route and really tripled down, and there's a lot of overdubs and layered things, and it sounds fantastic, and I'm happy with it. But it's a long way from the original improvisational concept. So I'm really trying to, so we're kind of focusing on this kind of, I think to call it systematic music is or aleatoric music or anything like that is missing the point. It's just kind of looking for systems so that we don't recognize the sounds coming out from the sounds that are coming in, and that kind of thing.
It's the opposite of symptomatic. What did you say? Sorry,
systematic music.
Systematic. There you go. Right. Surely it's the opposite of systematic music, because surely that kind of music would be sort of electronic, sequenced.
Well, absolutely. Electronic, perhaps in the Stockhausen sense rather than the Deadmau5 sense.
There's always that argument, isn't there, that electronic music is somehow a little bit removed from the warmth and the human feel of, for example, a load of guys in a room jamming.
Well, I think that's.
I would disagree with that, but if you take, for example, a record like Radiohead's Kid A, and you sort of, I think that record's got a very beautiful mix between human and sort of icy cold, that disparity. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. I think I think it takes a real lack of imagination to listen to electronic music and say there's no human element to it. But certainly the canvas has shifted there. If you're looking for people in a room jamming as far as a lot of electronic music goes, you'd be missing the point. But it's kind of like looking at constructionist art and saying, oh, well, it looks completely unnatural. It's kind of pointless. That's not the point of it. But I think there's certainly, really, I find the kind of electronic music I really like, you really can hear the human beings on the record as well. I'm thinking of No Man, the Stephen Wilson, Tim Bonus kind of project, all of that stuff. I mean, you couldn't call it anything but electronic, but the human element is absolutely in there as well. If you're looking at stuff like another electronic music guy I like is The Algorithm, where it's kind of like just very complicated, glitchy, kind of slightly mathy, I guess, kind of electronic music. But it's not like, oh, well, it just sounds like a computer's playing it, in the sense that you don't listen to bands like, gent bands like Meshuggah, where you've got incredibly complicated, non-intuitive rhythms, that it's human beings playing it, but it doesn't feel human in the sense that, I don't know, something like, I suppose, Led Zeppelin maybe feels much more personable. But you've still got a human being. You still got human beings as the architect of it all. You couldn't just tell a computer to make music and expect something like that to come out, because although the notes and the performances of them are mechanic and to some extent robotic, it's the aesthetic behind it that's the human element. And when you take a completely...
That's something that really interests me, is aesthetics in an audio art form, right? I mean, you can listen to a piece of music and that can conjure images in your imagination and in your mind that sort of can be very tangible and very real and very vivid. What do you think about that? And
I think you can get really weird about it, really, because
that's what I love about our conversation.
We're going to get weird with it. We're going to get weird with it. No,
no one else really gets it.
You can take completely instrumental music, and people will imprint whatever they want to on top of it. And all you need to do is give the instrumental piece of music a title, and people will immediately start imprinting onto it, all on their own, completely unrelated to any of the notes, because human beings want to see a pattern. They want to imagine there's a point to all of it. Then it gets even. I mean, even if you look at the kind of the semantics and the terminology behind audio, people talk about sounds being kind of a dark sound or a warm sound or a brittle sound or
a bright,
kind of thing.
or a happy
bright
sound.
Well, absolutely, but just talking about kind of high and low frequencies, you refer to bright or dark sounds, which is a completely ridiculous level because they have nothing to do with visual brightness. But somehow, I don't know if there's some kind of, I don't know, proto-synesthesia kind of thing going on. Not in a real synesthetic way, but where in synesthesia, people with synesthesia would hear a sound and associate it with a color.
See it as color.
And I don't know if it's kind of a Gestalt version of that same thing. The way that everyone almost intuitively hears high frequencies and low frequencies and refers to them as bright or dark or dull.
Yeah.
A dull sound, a low bassy sound gets referred to as dull.
But I also think it's really funny how you can take a song that's meant to be about sort of like blatantly, sort of criminally about positivity. For example, when I was in music class at school, we did quite a long syllabus, quite a long project based around Pharrell Williams's "Happy." Do you know that song?
Yeah.
If you right, I can't stand that song.
I'm with you there, but only because I've had to perform it too many times.
Rage, So you're talking about sort of associating visual images with sounds. To me, what that song conjures up in a rather beautifully ironic way is sort of the seventh circle of hell.
But that's your personal experiences projected onto the song. That has nothing to do with the song. And that's and you can kind of get weird when you start looking at music like that because suddenly it's almost completely arbitrary that it's happy by Pharrell.
To me,
it could be Happiness by Ken Dodd.
Sorry, go on.
It could be Happiness by Ken Dodd, and you still feel the exact same way about it. It's when you kind of try and abstract try and remove your own personal experiences from your interpretation. Suddenly, it gets a little bit weirder and more complicated. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe that's just me being a buzzkill.
Well, no. I think for me, I find it a lot more interesting when you do that with a piece of instrumental music. And you call it instrumental if it's a kind of a, fairly modern track. If it's a classical piece of music, for some reason people don't seem to throw instrumental around quite as much. But it's the same thing where, people will...
So what kind of instrumental music are we talking about? Because I've sort of, in the last few months, I've got quite a lot into sort of post-rock and bands like Godspeed You Black Emperor and what's the Icelandic one?
Sigur Rós.
Yes. Yeah. They're amazing. And for me, because it doesn't really have any lyrics to ground it, it becomes almost ethereal or sort of angelic.
It leaves you a lot of room to, as it's a blank canvas for you to project onto.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the appeal of it. I think when you take something that's slightly more overt, I guess, in the direction it's going in, it becomes a little bit more of a restrictive experience to listen to it. I'm just, I don't know, I suppose just for argument's sake, let's say we're talking about, I don't know, Iron Maiden, The Number of the Beast. I mean, you can argue back and forth about it, but there's not a whole lot of push and pull going on in that track. It's pretty direct as far as, instrumentally, as far as lyrically and But when you take something that suddenly has no lyrics, but it still has an aesthetic, it leaves a lot more room for you, the listener, to engage with it. And that doesn't mean, and we should all be listening to instrumental music because that's what clever people do. But it's a different form of engagement that I don't think you really get listening to, listening to. I want to say vocal music, but then I think even then, good vocal music leaves a little bit of room for interpretation. And I guess at that point you can extrapolate that to all art. All art leaves a little bit of room for interpretation.
Well, you know what I really love is sort of, and I tried to do something like this on My Truth recently, where I sort of went into an audio workstation and just messed around with my audio and took a song that I had previously done called Get Me Out of It and sort of chopped it up, slapped a ton of reverb on it, pitch shifted it so it sounded sort of alien and sort of really deep and like bottomless almost. And, because the lyrics were obscured almost, it had a different meaning, and the caption for it was there's always a light, and obviously that's related to trying to keep people's spirits up and sort of Mad Truth in itself being about using art and creativity and sort of your capacity as a creative individual to frame your pain and frame your trauma in a way where you can step outside of yourself almost, and you can look at it from an objective point of view and maybe gain a new perspective on it and maybe go, all right, this is what I was feeling in all its ugliness and rawness and you feel that on a visceral level, but maybe now that it is removed from you in a way, you can reframe it and you can tweak it in a way where it's something that becomes something beautiful. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think removing it from yourself at that point, when you create a piece of artwork about something, it makes it easier to draw the box around that experience, and instead of it being this thing you're grappling with, you can say, so it's this kind of, it's just kind of all in a nice neat box that you don't have to kind of. There's only so much thinking you need to do once you've kind of tried to create a piece of art about a feeling and then completed it. And I do mean completed it as in you say, okay, this is finished. I'm not going to work on this anymore. Whether you release it or not, it doesn't matter. But the fact that it's a completed thing in your mind at that point, and that was certainly my experience with all the kind of stuff I wrote for the. Just for example, the Without Pictures I Understand EP I wrote a couple of years ago was about having a very rough time of doing bar work and that kind of thing. Getting homophobic abuse and from the customers and that kind of stuff. And after you've kind of
that's quite a perverse thing of being an artist, right? Is sort of you have such an emotional investment, and I've experienced this quite intensely with things that I've been working on, is you feel really, really, really attached to it while you're working on it, and then as soon as you finish it, it's almost like, oh yeah, that's just another piece of work, and you're on to the next thing. People talk about creativity, and in a way it is being sort of this joyful, euphoric expression of self, and sure it is that, but what am I trying to say? I've completely lost my train of thought. That was going to be gold, man. That was going to be genius.
Well, it's all art is just, it's different methods of putting a frame around a human experience you had. And that's equally true whether you're painting pictures or writing stories or writing music, whether it's vocal music or instrumental music. I guess that's kind of what I'm kind of currently kind of working through. Is I've kind of compositionally I've been trying to shift away from this kind of structured kind of compositional approach toward this kind of systematic kind of thing, it's a different way to reach the same end goal insofar as coming up with a system that that adequately expresses the way I feel. And it's I guess it's it's different from kind of taking a blues chord progression, starting with I woke up this morning and seeing what happens after that. I guess it's a different thing, but it's at the end of the day, it's still just one more method of trying to externalize internal feelings. And and as far as aesthetics and that kind of thing, I think that conveys a whole lot more than anything you could put into the lyrics of a track, or even if you're talking about an instrumental track, the title of a track, to try and convey the meaning. It's all that which is left unsaid kind of stuff. And that, I think in any other art form, you kind of take that for granted. In a film, that the use of color and cinematography has a lot to say about the narrative. In the same way you look at a painting, that there's a lot going on with the color and the framing and the kind of lines of action and that kind of thing. But I find myself frustrated with rock musicians who are content to write a good riff and follow it up with another good riff. You get to the end of it. I think it's quite important. Sorry?
What's wrong with an album? What's wrong with an album or a song that's sort of linear and it says its point in a really straightforward kind of way. I mean, you can say that that's basic or
basic is the wrong word for it, because it doesn't need to be basic. But when I think certainly listen to listen to a lot of technical death metal for a fair while, and there's a lot of focus on very flashy riffing and all this kind of stuff. But I guess technical death metal's a pretty easy target, but there's only so much in the aesthetic.
The same way though that top 40 radio pop music is an easy target. Like, why do you think it's easy to take a number one single and sort of slate it for being too commercial or too basic, or
I think that's potentially putting the cart before the horse, to take a commercial recording or a commercially successful recording and then criticize it for being commercial. I'm sure you'd find the same people kind of criticizing Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon for being kind of too popular and commercial, in spite of it being a pretty avant-garde record. But it's kind of its commercial success is its commercial success kind of came after the record was written and released, as opposed to the kind of pop music process that was happening before Pink Floyd, and obviously carried on since, where people are sitting in rooms trying to figure out what sells.
All right, so
and their aesthetics,
trying to figure out what sells. Do you think that is they're relinquishing some kind of artistic integrity in the same way? Is that why people sort of slate?
You don't criticize architects for doing exactly what the customer wanted when they design a building. You don't kind of you don't. I mean, you can't.
At the London skyline, which is fucking atrocious.
Well, yeah, but the art in the construction of anything doesn't it doesn't have to be completely unique and individual to be of merit. But let me just pick up the train I was running with a minute. Yeah, so if you're talking about kind of people deliberately composing music to sell, then they've got to consider aesthetics in a very different way. It's still the exact same question. When we're sitting in our rooms writing music about how depressed we are, and you do it, I know I do it, I know it's what we'll do.
Sorry, what was that?
When we're sitting in our rooms on our own writing music about how depressed we are, I guess you maybe don't think about aesthetics in such a kind of straightforward way and think, because I'm feeling this way, I need to write a song that sounds like this.
I don't do that at all. I don't know what you're on about. I'm a very positive individual, and I try and no, I'm joking. No, what you're talking about.
But it's you're channeling knowing that you're trying to create something based on your own feelings kind of dictates the aesthetic you're going for.
Yeah.
Then if you're sitting there trying to create something with commercial appeal, that doesn't mean that you suddenly don't have to consider the aesthetic of it. The art is in creating or crafting a kind of musical aesthetic that accurately conveys whatever feeling it is you're trying to convey. You could do it in a very, very plain, boring, straightforward way. I don't know, just throw together C major, F major, and G major. Write some happy lyrics, and try not to stick straight too far from the kind of the major scale. But you could do that. But if you look at
there's you in like darkened room, like B flat Dorian. Like you've got
it's worse than that. My partner had to suffer the other day when I was just sitting in my office, kind of. I was trying to create like something that would just kind of. This is for rather than radio eroticism. This was a solo album thing I'm currently working on. But I was kind of trying to create this perfect generator of kind of like a double string quartet playing. One was kind of atonal, one's not atonal, and it just sounds like an absolute bloody mess. It sounded awful. It sounded wonderful, but it was like I'd set this system up so it sounded the exact way I wanted it, and then my computer crashed and I wasn't able to recover the project, so I had to rebuild it. I had to recreate this kind of completely random kind of string quartet generator from scratch. And my partner had just sat there listening to me complain about how it's the wrong kind of awful sound. It's the wrong kind of random. That's kind of
random.
Well, absolutely. That's the kind of the double-edged sword of trying to use systematic music. Is if you create a system where you can't rely on a consistent result, you've just got to cross your fingers and hope that the result comes out kind of the way you want it. But then, if it doesn't,
really, how often does it come out the way you want it to?
Well, that's the thing. It's not about creating something that every single time it does it, the exact way you want it. It's about creating something that you don't know what it's going to do, and you, as a system designer, you can get the gist of what it's going to do. But the best thing in music for me is whenever I hear something and thought, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have seen that coming. And when you kind of offload the compositional work to a system to do it for you, I mean, yes, it's functionally the same thing happening, but I think
that's where you and me differ in a way, because I'm not looking for, or maybe I am sometimes, but I'm not looking necessarily for a surprise. I'm looking for just to relate to what somebody else on the other side of the planet is going through, and I'm going through a similar thing, and through sound and through vibration and through creativity and whatever, you can feel sort of comforted and
so to be surprised doesn't preclude comfort or relatability. The thing that
you can find comfort in a really abrasive experimental hip hop album.
Well, absolutely. It's not about the aesthetic of the music. It's about listening to something and realizing, oh hell, that the person who made this gets it. I see exactly what they were going for here. It's
Yeah.
not about the music. It's never about the music in the way that it's never about the individual work of art. It's the music or the painting or the film or the story is all just kind of reflections and echoes of the person behind it, and that's what's interesting about any given thing. And what we want to when you're looking at or listening to a piece of music, you're not looking for this person has also heard I don't know, this person also really liked King Diamond, so now it sort of sounds a bit like that. You're looking for a slightly more, I think consciously or otherwise, when you're listening to music, you're kind of looking for a slightly more 3D image of a person behind it. And I think that's probably more true now than ever. I was watching Steven Wilson interviews. He's talking about his new. He released Personal Shopper the other day. And all of his his new stuff's kind of very poppy and that kind of thing. And he talks about kind of being conscious that today's audience is more interested in investing in the artist's persona than the album itself. There's less of a cult of around the album as much as the person making it, regardless of what the album is. I think in some ways that's quite liberating, because it means you don't have any. It sounds really bad if I say you don't have any obligation to make anything good, because that's not what I mean. But anything that you make can only be a product of the life that you have lived, because you may have listened to the same album as somebody else, but you also lived through it like this, and you heard it when you were this age while you were experiencing these things, which is completely different from the other people who listened to that album maybe at the same age, but they had a completely different experience. And so with this kind of focus on, and to be honest, I've thought about this a lot in the context of YouTubers and YouTube musicians, where, off the top of my head, the first person to spring to mind is Ben Levin, whose music is fantastic. And I think a large part of his success is because he's kind of quite carefully positioned himself within the kind of, the playing field of YouTube musicians. I certainly knew about him from his work with Adam Neely, and that was kind of where I suddenly discovered Bent Knee, and of course Bent Knee suddenly have managed to kind of get the snowball rolling on their own kind of critical acclaim. But that's kind of how I heard about him, and I think if someone had sent me a link to Bent Knee, I probably would have really liked the music, but I wouldn't have remembered it per se in the same way that I remember Ben Levin. And I can tell you exactly what Ben Levin's like when he's at home on his own, mucking around with a computer, having never met the guy or spoken to him, because we now, especially with YouTube and the kind of the free availability and the democratization of not just the means to create music, but the means to kind of talk about your own music without needing to be kind of called in by a record label or a music magazine to ask you to talk about it.
Yeah, you don't need mainstream media anymore. You don't need.
Well, absolutely. But that's an interesting. Whatever. And that's been talked about to death already. But in the context we are currently talking, in the middle of a lockdown, in the middle of a global pandemic, I was stricken by how it couldn't have been like this at any other time. My housemate, Mick from Wilted Flower, was on a gig, and of course, it's not a unique thing by any stretch, but, everyone's kind of, all the gigs that were planned in the diary have been turned into online gigs. And, everyone's kind of doing it online in the, they're kind of just bashing it out in front of a camera or in front of a webcam or whatever, and everyone else is kind of following them on Twitch or Facebook Live events or what have you. And that couldn't have happened 5 years ago. I think the internet infrastructure was there for it, but the culture of streaming wasn't really there.
Foreshadowed, in a weird way, right? With sort of the advent of things like vaporwave and sort of sad boy aesthetics.
Frankly, I think that's a different thing.
Windows,
Well, what I mean is that I don't know. Take for example, this exact same situation happens. There's a global pandemic and we're locked down, but the year is 1975 rather than 2020. You don't have the internet, so musicians can't interact with each other. We certainly, if you fast forward that to the mid 90s, okay, so at this point, or even in the late 80s, so suddenly, although we don't have, you wouldn't have the internet, so we could do these kind of live gigs and all this kind of thing. Suddenly, by the late 80s, home recording gear is slightly cheaper. So suddenly, even if musicians are locked down, they can still be working on their own things. Run that towards kind of the late 90s, and people are able to kind of record things at home and kind of post them on message boards and so on and so forth. Mid 2000s, the same thing. Suddenly, you've got YouTube, and even though we're locked down, you can still be interacting and creating and sharing things with other people. In the in kind of 2000, like I said, in 2015, I can't ever imagine, I remember streaming being a thing at the time. I remember people posting Let's Plays and that kind of thing. But I couldn't imagine so many people kind of being able to perform these kind of, incredibly kind of, well-attended digital gigs. And the idea of a digital gig on its own is a strange, kind of term I never thought I'd be using. But, sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, sorry. If you go to a concert, the reason why people go to concerts and go to gigs is because of that feeling of community, right? You all gather around this music that the band's playing, and you're all on this sort of shared wavelength or whatever, which is an amazing pun.
Frankly, I feel like it's even stronger with a digital gig, because you have that kind of uncomfortable in-person antisocialness you get at gigs where everyone, or certainly me, people like me, where I'm not very good at talking to people in person. So I'll go to a gig and not speak to a single person. Whereas these, with the lower kind of social threshold of going to a gig digitally, it's a completely different experience. And it certainly couldn't replace a real gig, but people keep talking about how once this is all over, will telecommuting be working from home, is that going to be a much bigger thing? What's going to change now that we know it's an option? And performing gigs from our living room, I mean, it certainly seems quite convenient. It doesn't replace gigs for real, but it's a different avenue for bands to reach an audience. And it seems quite obvious in retrospect, but I can't think of any high-profile bands doing anything like that. Well,
for me, on an individual level, I have an intrinsic need for human communication, right? If I don't see my friends, or if I don't speak to my friends,
you
or
mean
if
in person?
In person, or just over the phone, or what, so obviously the words in it, right? Like self-isolation is very isolated,
who would have thunk?
I tend to I live my life in a very structured way at the minute, and the reason why I do that, and I have done that for quite a while now, is because if I'm sort of aimless and wandering around and I don't have goals and lists a lot of the time, so I'll have notebooks of things to do, and it'll just be pages and pages and pages of ideas and tasks to do and poetry and all that will be swarming around my head 24/7, and it's about 40 different things at the same time, right? And I feel like you could equate that with being at a gig. Is the sensory overload is quite powerful, and you can even extend that to society in general. We live lives where we already sort of are isolated, but we're isolated within this sort of technicolor, kaleidoscopic vortex of bills to pay and jobs to go to and sort of fast food and
I think that there's some
all this politics, right? And you strip that away, and I put that on my truth the other day, and I was dead proud of myself because it was 5 a.m, and it was the first time in my life that I've actually come up with a good point of 5 a.m.
That was a decent write-up, I thought, actually. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Well, we strip all that away, right? And you strip away all the bullshit of what we're told every single day. Something like this comes up. Something like our mate Corona, which is so sort of massive.
It's a paradigm shift. I think it's fair to say that it's changed everything in every industry.
Yeah, and as soon as you strip that away and you're left with that emptiness, you rediscover the power of human compassion, human kindness, human connectivity, whether it be in person or whether it be over the internet. You rediscover humanity's need for each other and the need for kindness and the need for compassion and the need for everyone to work together. I think it's so beautiful, man. How people have just rallied together, and
it's really startling how stark it has been.
Oh yeah, it's bleak. Can I tell you a story?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so speaking of bleakness, I went to my local shop around the corner from me yesterday because we needed some stuff for the house or whatever, some food or essentials, because you're only allowed to go out for essentials. But I go there, and there's sort of lines on the floor of the shop. Like, you can't, my mum gave me a list, so I was looking at the list and I forgot something, so I had to go all the way around the shop again, like over and over and over. It's like, shit, I forgot something again. And then everyone's like shouting at each other, like, the shop workers are like shouting at people saying 2 meters apart, 2 meters apart, and yeah, it's nuts. And I pay, and I'm walking out the shop, and there's a guy in full-on body armor. Like, do you know how when you go to a bank or whatever, you'll see them guys in the sort of body armor, the headgear or whatever, and he's just standing there like a fucking colossus or whatever, like one of the titans from Greek mythology. He's just sort of there, and I'm like, okay, that's great. And I walk outside, and I'm sort of, with my anxiety and my mental health, which hasn't been that great, to be honest, lately.
No.
I walk outside, and I'm directly in not eye level, but my eyesight directly goes like 20/20 vision to a dog taking a shit. All right, I witnessed it. I witnessed the shit fall from the bum hole and land on the concrete below. And after I sort of witnessed this event, this cataclysmic event of a dog taking a shit, I realised that I was fucked. And at that moment, the dog barked at me. And because I was already sort of unsettled, the dog shit me up, and I basically jumped out of my skin. I didn't scream like a little girl. That is my one claim to fame. That is my one saving grace of that situation, was I did not whine like a little bitch. But yeah, it did shit me up a little bit, and that was probably a very poetic way.
You certainly have a way with words.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
It certainly feels bleak, and as a music teacher, I'm it's getting away with kind of just doing all my lessons remotely at the minute. But it's scary times, and I have and of course no one knows really when it's going to go back to normal. If I'm sure it will go back to normal, but
Well, I'm hoping. They're saying.
But what you said about the the human need for community and so on and so forth. It really is striking that I mean, we know that life finds a way, and when there's will, there's a way, and everything carries on as normal no matter what. But the gigs are still happening. Musicians are still playing with each other. It's a little bit more annoying to do it at the minute, for sure. But everything is still happening. It's really striking that we've got the technology to do all this stuff. I can only imagine how it would have turned out 15 years ago or something like that, without the kind of internet infrastructure for streaming gigs and that kind of thing. But then, I think it would have been the exact same thing happening on, internet forums instead. God, remember those. But I don't know. I think you're absolutely right that, no matter how you cut it, it eventually boils back to a human need for interaction. And whether that's kind of in a passive way, kind of picking it up from the art that we consume when we're sitting in, because no one's sitting here in their house on their own waiting to go back outside. Everyone is watching TV, watching films, playing video games, listening to music. Everyone's doing stuff. Everyone's engaging with art stuff. And, I think you've seen people you see people posting memes on, those kind of inane memes on Facebook kind of saying, see how important art is now you're stuck in the house. But on a very real level, everyone is still engaging with other people, be it engaging with art stuff and kind of getting the gist of how other people are passively or actively putting on digital gigs and kind of collaborating with other musicians over that kind of thing.
Years and years and years of the government cutting art funds and sort of shutting gig venues down and galleries, and all of a sudden something like this happened and you're reminded of the need for artistic expression and culture, and because without
but that's a completely different kind of way to frame the whole thing is and we're just talking about people consuming artistic stuff and talking about kind of so-called pre-existing musicians, but being that everyone is now trapped in a house, suddenly I've certainly, as far as my students go, I've seen an uptick in people who are now just, they're mucking around, they've got nothing else to do in the house, so they might as well try and make something instead of just, consuming stuff. And that in and of itself is really interesting as well. Suddenly everyone's got time to actually try making stuff.
And that's beautiful. I feel that's positive. Because more people will discover their capacity for creativity, and maybe out of like 1,000 people, one of those people, or two of those people, three of those people, hopefully, have something really of value to say.
That's the thing. If you turn it into if you play the numbers game, if 10% of the people who are locked in houses at the minute, decide to take up artistic expression, and 10% of those people, rather than dabbling, they kind of really find something they quite like. You've now got 1% of the entire population who are now kind of have got a new hobby, and if you take 1% of those people, 1% of 1%, suddenly they kind of do something that they kind of find something that's not just kind of self-gratifying, in terms of kind of filling the hours in, but actually kind of find a way to express themselves in a way they wouldn't have otherwise. 1% of 1% is still a bloody big number when you take a global population.
Totally.
And that's the weird thing, is that it's not, if we were talking about the UK, that's one thing. If we were talking about America, that's one thing. But it's everywhere. And it's affecting the entire world in exactly the same way.
Yeah, man, totally. I mean, I'm going to have to go because I really need a wee. And also, I've got something.
I think that's a fair point to end on. Is the
listen, man, as always, it's good talking to you. You're very insightful, very intelligent, very passionate.
I've been accused of a lot before, but that's pushing it. But yeah, I don't know. Community, music, and the community, fun times.
There's always, no matter how, and this is something that I've learned from my life specifically, no matter how bad things get, no matter how dark things are, there's always a light. There's always a positive, and there's always beauty. There's always something.
There's always one door closes, another door opens. There's always something.
Exactly.
Nice one.
That's a good metaphor. Thank you.
We'll leave it there. I don't think I've got anything to push at the minute. I'm working on the Radio Eroticism 2 Earth Drowning album, which will be out in the next couple of months. Vaguely working on a solo album too, but probably not for a while yet. But yeah, good to talk to you, man.
Cool, man. Yes, lad. Stay busy, stay safe. Everyone, who's listening, thank you for listening. Yeah, I do. I appreciate every single one of you.
We
And
appreciate both of you.
both of you. Yeah, us too. Yeah, man. Self-esteem is good. It's a good thing. But seriously, much love. Yeah, stay safe. Look after yourself. Look after your family. Look after your friends. Peace, love, positivity. Yeah, man.
See you on the other side.
What's the other side?
Well, hopefully, being allowed out of the house again.
A better day.
Better day, absolutely.
All right,
Have a good man.
Podcast. Daniel Egan, the man, the myth, the legend.
www.deganmusic.co.uk.
Plug. Matchu Podcast. Like the Facebook page. Follow the YouTube channel. Do all that because it will make me really happy when I'm awake at 3 a.m. hating myself. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.